Lisa, Mona Lisa, men have names.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this countdown for the top 50 albums of the 50s. First time on my channel in this countdown, of course, that I'm doing with Johnny Radio himself, Mr. John Stanek. Very excited to get into the second episode. Almost halfway through the series, I guess. Not quite, but we're getting there already, and that shows you how short this countdown is. But great countdown it's going to be nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. If you tuned into the first episode already, you know we've hit on some very heavy hitters already, man. The great Ray Charles and Miles Davis, and yeah, I can't wait to see where we go next. So yeah, let's get into it, man.
All right, man, let's do just that, starting with number 40. Chet Baker Sings from 1954. Of course, album is from the legendary singer trumpeter Chet Baker, and this is one of the first albums, I believe, in which he finally heard his golden boy pipes for the first time. I think, it must be noted not only just how great he was as a trumpeter, but also as a singer. He just had this, really silky soothe silky smooth innocent voice. I heard someone describe it as if Jimmy Olsen from the Superman comics became a jazz singer or something, and I think
Yeah.
that's pretty apt to describe, because his tone is just so pure, and yet again, like the way he phrases certain words, it's like you're holding on to every single thing that he is saying, just because his tone is so unbelievable and so perfectly balanced and controlled. I really can't, give enough praises to him as a vocalist, but I think the arrangements on these songs really make them stand out right from the beginning. But Not For Me, which probably is my favorite song off of this record. You can tell, he's got his own little solo that he has. Yet again, the arrangements themselves are very, sublime, and very, I don't know if unpredictable is the right word, but it feels right within the vein of all great jazz. And yet again, so many great songs. Of course, My Funny Valentine, which a lot of people consider to be his signature song and the signature recording of this song. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it is a fantastic record. You can't really deny that. And even just yet again, the painstaking beauty in, like, I fall in love too easily. Like the way he phrases, I fall in love so well. I'm screwing it up. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm kind of tired.
That's one of
Um,
my favorites. Yeah, that's a
yeah.
good one.
And yet again, I have to emphasize how great the phrasing is on this. But yet again, the upbeat arrangements of There Will Never Be Another You is an absolute standout on here. And of course, the closing track, Look for the Silver Lining. I mean, you couldn't think of a better way to close this, album on such a positive and bright and sunny note. I do think it gets a little slow in the middle, and I think it just gets a little samey. But regardless, this made my list, I think probably around the spot that it is here. So, I'm just really happy overall to see this make the list. Nonetheless, I had this number 37 actually, so I think it could have been a few spots higher, but I'm very happy with it at number 40 on this countdown.
No, yeah, it's a good record. I didn't have it on my list, but mainly for the reason that you mentioned, that like it does get kind of slow and samey at points. But yeah, no denying his voice was n nothing quite like it. I almost would say like t two totally different styles and eras, but he would have been like the Jeff Buckley of the 50s, if that makes any sense.
Interesting.
Um,
Interesting.
but
Okay.
yeah, it's sort of like, I don't know, in some points like almost effeminate, like the way that his voice sounds, but in just a really beautiful way. But yeah, I think all the songs you mentioned are great. And yeah, My Funny Valentine, gotta love it. Although so many versions of that, so it's like who's to say what's the best? But yeah, great on trumpet as well, and the other guys playing with him are great. But yeah, if you're in the mood for some slow jazz, this is a great place to go to. So yeah, glad it made the list.
Yeah, absolutely check this one out if you haven't already. I feel like it could have been higher had a couple more people have listened to it, but yet again, really great to see this on the list nonetheless. And that now is going to take us to number 39.
Songs for Swingin' Lovers by Frank Sinatra from 1956. Yes, man, the first Sinatra album to make it onto this list, and hopefully not the last. I mean, Frank was absolutely killing it in this decade and even beyond. And this is one of those albums that it's just so fun from start to finish, so upbeat. As opposed to Chet Baker sings, not saying anything bad about that, but I mean, You Make Me Feel So Young, just such a fun, grooving song. You've got It Happened in Monterey that it always makes me think of Al Pacino as the devil and Devil's Advocate singing that for some reason, which is like a ridiculous scene in movie history. You've got I've Got You Under My Skin, which is one of my favorites of all time of Old Blue Eyes. And you've got some like ridiculous tunes in there too, like Making Whoopee and stuff, but it's all fun, man, and it's all good and it makes you I'm not going to say it's teeth out music because, in my opinion, that didn't come onto the scene until late 70s. But yeah, but it is music that kind of makes you want to dance and maybe even swing dance, whatever. But yeah, I dig it and I'm glad it made the list.
Yeah, Sinatra, love Sinatra, one of the most prominent musical figures in my life, when I was first getting into music and also in my personal life as well.
Yeah.
But this album, I feel like Sinatra's albums, everyone just like clamors over them so much. I don't really understand, and I'm going to bring this up many times, because look, as I said, Sinatra, absolute legend, gotta love Old Blue Eyes and that wonderful voice of his, one of the greatest singers of all time. I don't think anyone would argue that. But I think this album is pretty overrated. I think it's good. I think just that one-two punch of "You Make Me Feel So Young" and "It Happened in Monterey," especially "You
Yeah.
Make Me Feel So Young." I think that's one of the best recordings that he's ever done. So iconic. Of course, used to great effect in Elf. It always comes back to that for me.
Yeah.
But honestly, this might be there might be another song that I love on this album. It's been a long time, but I just think the song loses a lot of energy and a lot of momentum after this first. Unlike Chet Baker Sings, which is only about 22 minutes long, and it picks up pretty quickly by the end. This is like just about 44 minutes, and I feel like it feels way too long. And I feel like this applies to a lot of Sinatra albums from this era. I'm not saying everyone is like this, but I think this one certainly, it makes sense that they removed it from the Rolling Stone list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, because I don't think it is one of them. And I can almost see why it made this list, but to be honest, yeah, I think this is overrated. I think there are better Sinatra albums from that decade that didn't quite make the list. And yeah, it's good, but I certainly don't understand the complete appeal of it beyond a couple of pretty amazing tracks.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's in no way like an amazing album overall. There's definitely some of those heavy hitter songs on it, but I'm gonna say what I said about Ray Charles last week, which with Frank for the most part, usually I'm gonna listen to some kind of compilation for the most part
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of his best songs are spread out amongst other albums, um, but yeah, I mean, you gotta have some Sinatra records on the top 50 of the 50s. There's no doubt about it. And so yeah, glad to have them.
For sure, man, and we might touch more on that topic later, of course. But as it stands right now, let's move it on to number 38. Saxophone Colossus by Sonny Rollins from 1956. This was the album that really broke Sonny Rollins out to the mainstream, and it's kind of crazy just hearing the story behind this, because this was recorded, I'd say, 4 days before before Clifford Brown and Richie Powell, his former band members, died in a car crash. So it's sort of like weird how the fate of, or the fate of time, I guess that's a good way of putting it, kind of reared its head in this, because yet again, horrible tragedy, lost two really great musicians, but it really kind of, I guess in some ways, this paved the way for him to become the success that he would. And I believe Sonny Rollins is the only artist on this list who is still alive, which is kind of crazy to just think how all these people have basically been lost to time, as that always does happen. But really, I think what was achieved here with all these guys in this band, of course, you got Rollins on tenor saxophone, Tommy Flanagan on piano, Doug Watkins on bass, and of course the legendary Max Roach on drums. You get some really great tracks on here, like St. Thomas opening this thing up with some really, really cool hard bop. Of course, you have to mention Strode Road, which I think is easily the best and breakneck song on this entire album. I also love their interpretation, or at least in parts of Moritat, which of course was later turned into Mac the Knife, made most popular by Bobby Darin. And yeah, I think it's a really good album overall. There's a lot of really like high points on this record, but to me, I as much as I do like this album, yet again, not as overrated as something like Songs for Swingin' Lovers, I would say, but I do find it to be slightly overrated in the sense I don't think this is one of the best jazz albums of all time. It didn't quite make my list or anything, and that's because, and maybe this is a personal preference thing, at least when it comes to drums, because I think Max Roach was one of the greatest drum players in the history of jazz music. I'd say right in the top two. It's pretty hard to make an argument against that. But for me, when drum solos happen in isolation, a lot of the times it just it feels like it breaks the tension of the song a bit, and I just become very disinterested. And that's why I'm saying maybe this is just a personal thing. But he gets a lot of solos here that are like technically impressive, but I don't think anything that really stands out amongst other solos I've heard from some other of his contemporaries, like Art Blakey or anything like that, or any compared to some of the best stuff that Roach has done on certain records. And you get a lot of that throughout this entire album, and so it kind of ebbs and flows into how much I like it. But on top of that, I don't find this to be particularly as enthralling or as or stands out as much as some of the best hard bop music. And I hear that perhaps this was a transitioning point for Rollins and for hard bop music. Also, this album came out in 1957. My apologies there. But was recorded in 1956. I'm too tired for this, I'm telling you. Anyway, I still think, though, that this is quite a achievement and definitely, as I said, a turning point. So I understand why it's on the list, and I certainly don't think it's a bad choice at all.
Yeah, no, it's really strong. It didn't quite make my list, and honestly, I hadn't even listened to it before the list came out. So this is one of those. Actually, I only listened to it for the first time this past week, and yeah, really strong. I think it's at a pretty good spot, honestly, because so far out of the jazz albums that we've talked about, I think it's my favorite of those, even above the Thelonious Monk and Sonny Rollins album just by a hair.
Mm.
I love Strode Road, man. I think that's great. And all the songs you mentioned, but yeah, Sonny Rollins, he's definitely got to be up there as far as one of the best saxophonists in the game, and great to see him make the list now twice technically. So yeah, great pick, guys.
Yeah, man, and really, I think maybe the last like living jazz legend from that era when it comes to the big names you think of in the vein of Coltrane and Davis, and so yeah, really happy to see him represented on this countdown even more than once, and so yeah, good choice, guys, and that is going to take us now to number 37.
Well, that'll be the day.
The Chirping Crickets by the Crickets from 1957. Yeah, not surprised to see this on the list. And honestly, I was quite surprised with how many good songs were on this album. Of course, most of them penned by Buddy Holly, who would go on to his own fame shortly after this, in a very short-lived career, unfortunately. But yeah, songs like "Not Fade Away." A lot of his originals, I think, are the standouts here. Of course, That'll Be the Day, just an absolute classic, no matter what version it is. Then you've got songs like Oh Boy, which is really fun. A lot of just really upbeat, fun numbers that just put a smile on your face. Like Maybe Baby, like the way he sings it. Maybe Baby, I love you. I mean, it's so 50s, man. It's like, and
Hmm.
when you think of it that way, it's like Buddy Holly was truly one of the pioneers of 50s music as popular rock and roll goes. And yeah, just some great stuff, man. Send Me Some Lovin'. There's really not too many weak tracks on here, and it does go by pretty quickly, as most of the song lengths are like 2 minutes on average. So, yeah, I'm glad to see it make the list. It didn't quite make mine. I went with some different Buddy Holly records where it was after the Chirping Crickets. But yeah, very good pick, guys.
Yeah, so here's my thing with this album. When I first heard this album, I wouldn't say thoroughly unimpressed or anything like that because I did enjoy it overall, but it really did make me think Buddy Holly was a bit overrated. I was wrong about that, of course, as I came to learn. But I think what my problem is with this album is the backing vocals are so just mawkish and so 50 where they're like, oh boy, like it's just
Yeah,
really
yeah,
really dated and cheesy, and I
right.
think it really takes away from the great hooks that were written by
Yeah, that's why I prefer the Buddy by himself afterward.
right.
Yeah.
And I think yet again it really hinders songs like Oh Boy and Not Fade Away, which I would love otherwise if it weren't for those vocals. But yet again, and that's why I'm like, yeah, this is a good album. I don't think it's great. I think it's yet again another overrated album that people consider to be a classic. I understand its importance because look, the Crickets were the first like four-piece band lineup that came to be defined by all the bands that came after them, like the Beatles. I mean, that's why they named them the Beatles. They had to name it after a bug, right? And that really shows just how far reaching Buddy Holly's influence is. But, there'll be more on that later, I suppose. And look, I think, yet again, to your point about his vocals, just that classic hiccup vocals, that maybe, baby.
Yeah.
Like I screwed it up. I could do it better another day. But yet again, it adds such a charm, and really, he was such a distinctive vocalist, even if he wasn't necessarily the absolute strongest singer from his era. He was certainly an iconic vocalist at that, and I really think that That'll Be the Day is such a timeless Buddy Holly classic, timeless classic from that era, even though it is very much of its time, and you can tell from the recording. But I mean, how can you not love? Well, that'll be the day when you say goodbye. Well, that'll be the day. Yet again, I mean, it's just an amazing, amazing song. But yeah, yet again, I think these songs are a little bit too, I guess childish in some ways, and a little bit too cutesy wootsy for my taste. But yet again, I mean, there's better Buddy Holly records that I think really kind of fleshed out his sound, and just how creative and innovative he was as an artist is just unfortunate that it took me that long to get to it after listening to this album. So yeah, not a bad choice, but I certainly don't. I wouldn't put it on the list personally, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I got you. And I just want to say for the record, I'm not even that big like of a Buddy Holly fan, but I from an influence standpoint, I mean, everything that you said, you cannot deny that. And not just how he sang, but also in his guitar playing, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and
Very underrated
songwriting.
guitarist.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. So, yeah, absolutely, man.
All right, well, hey guys, that's going to take us now to number 36.
The Best of Muddy Waters by Muddy Waters. Yet another blues compilation here. And yeah, hey, what are you going to do? There were a lot of blues singles being released in the late 40s, early 50s. So this one, though, it doesn't feel very thrown together. It feels like a cohesive, a great chronicling of another great bluesman, man, with songs like I Just Want to Make Love to You and Long Distance Call, and of course, Hoochie Coochie Man, which was actually penned by Willie Dixon, who actually plays bass on that song on this album and a couple other tracks, which is really cool. But yeah, just that riff, man, it's iconic. That dun, 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 which is used in so many other songs, but you know, just the lyrics so ridiculous, and I'm your Hoochie Coochie Man. Oh man, I just love it. And you know, it went on to inspire countless other blues musicians and then rock and rollers like, you know, the Doors doing Backdoor Man, or, you know, some other versions of this kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, Muddy Waters, absolutely just one of the most iconic blues musicians. Everything from Rolling Stone, I'm Ready. Really, every track is great in some way or another. It does get a little samey, as some of these blues albums tend to do, but yeah, I'm really glad that this one made the list. I think it was on many lists that were submitted, so I wasn't surprised, and at a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I personally didn't have this one on my list, which is not to say that I don't love Muddy Waters, because I do. I mean, I think he's maybe the most significant player in the blues besides the legend behind Robert Johnson. But I just think for his entire catalog, Muddy Waters is it, you know? And yet again, I mean, gotta love Long Distance Call, and you gotta love Muddy Waters playing as a guitarist here, because I think his control on the guitar, and the way he sort of, you know, inflects, you know, through his playing, it's really quite a skill that's really hard to capture, and he's drawing so much emotion out of the, you know, these low down blues songs. I love how dirty these songs get, you know, especially at a time where, you know, you had to be careful with that sort of thing, or maybe, you know, the public wasn't really ready for it, but this guy was like right down in there, man, with some of these songs. You know, yet again, love Long Distance Call, but Hoochie Coochie Man, I think, is the easy standout on there, for at least for me. A lot of great tracks to notice. Not really any bad tracks on here. Just a little samey sounding, as you know, a lot of these blues albums were. But considering this is a compilation album, you know, compiling songs all the way from 1948 to 1954, I mean, you can't really, you know, fault it too much. And still, I mean, I think this is a really solid record. Didn't make my list, but, you know, just to have Muddy Waters on here in some capacity is certainly not a bad thing in my book.
Absolutely, man.
But yeah, so let's take that now, guys, to number 35.
I'll have a blue.
Well, it's Christmas time, pretty baby. Yeah, man. Elvis Christmas album from 1957. Gotta love this one. This is an absolute Christmas classic, and at one point was in my top 10 albums of the 50s. That is no longer the case, and I don't know why it was there. But this is still a great record that certainly made my list at a fairly reasonable spot, I would say. I'm just looking up here to see. Oh, no kidding. It was number 35 on my list.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Couldn't work out any better than that, right?
Yeah, man.
But you could see quite a significant drop, but I think a lot of that is because of the back half of this album, which features
Dude, it
a
was number
couple.
33 on my list. I just looked.
So you could say this is pretty perfectly placed on
Yeah.
this list,
Yes.
which I'm very happy about. I just think, after "O Little Town of Bethlehem" and "Silent Night," this album really loses a lot of steam. It's just a bunch of Christian songs from his EP, "Peace in the Valley," which is fine. None of them are really bad or anything like that, but
Yeah.
it's really the first half of this album coming out with those original Lieber and Stoller Christmas rockers like "Santa Claus is Back in Town." It's just an explosive, blistering rock song, blues rock song that just absolutely rips to this day with Elvis's iconic voice. First appearance of Elvis Presley on this list, by the way. I forgot to mention that, but of course you knew he was going to be on here. And of course, I love his cool, low-down version of White Christmas, which apparently was so controversial that Irving Berlin wanted it banned from all the radio stations. And you listen to today, it's like this is just like a nice version of the song. I don't get what the big
Yeah.
deal is, but anyway, that was 1950s America. What can you do? But yet again, his version of "Here Comes Santa Claus" is so iconic at this point. "I'll Be Home for Christmas," I think, is just such a beautiful and beautifully performed rendition of that song. Of course, "Santa Bring My Baby Back to Me" is another Elvis classic. "Well, oh Santa, hear my plea." I mean, how can you not love or Elvis's iconic pipes on this song? But really, it's "Blue Christmas" that has stood the test of time. It is one of the most iconic Christmas songs of all time, and you could say one of the best songs in Elvis's entire discography. I mean, as soon as you hear him come in, ever blue, like you just
Yeah.
know that it's Christmas time
And
here
those
once
like kind
again.
of goofy background vocals, like
Yeah. From the Jordan
yeah,
eras, yeah,
yeah,
man, and in that case, it
yeah.
does work. And how can you not love this record? I just think this is a classic Christmas album in more ways than one, and really glad, obviously, to see it right at this spot on the list.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I was surprised I had it even higher than you did, but yeah, I love a good Christmas album, and this is definitely up there as far as some of the best of all time. Even though I tend to like a Sinatra Christmas album a little bit more personally. Or it's a compilation, so it's kind of a cheat, but yeah, like some of the all the songs you mentioned, I even love his "O Little Town of Bethlehem" and "Silent
Yeah.
Night." I mean, just great stuff, man. But yeah, some iconic tunes, and yeah, wild that this is the first Elvis on the list, but yeah, certainly will not be the last. So great pick, guys, and perfect spot, obviously.
Absolutely. And to be honest, the fact that this is first doesn't really come as a surprise to me, because, Elvis is one of the most, maybe the most iconic artist from the 50s, and one that we'll be talking about for the majority of this countdown, I'm sure. But yeah, guys, great record, and that is going to take us now to number 34. "Unforgettable" by Nat King Cole from 1952. Oh my goodness, so glad to see Nat King Cole make this list. One of my favorite vocalists from this era. I'm not saying he was the absolute best, but he was certainly one of the most iconic, and someone I still think we talk about to this day. And I think in some ways is overlooked, but in some ways is not. And I think is justly gotten his flowers in the years since he passed in 1965. But even so, I mean, this really is to me, the definitive Nat King Cole record I've heard so far. I'm still trying to go through his stuff. I actually had a lot of Nat King Cole's albums on my list. Sadly, none of the other ones made it. And if you haven't heard some of his early jazz stuff as a pianist, you should really, really check it out, because that dude was incredible on keys. But I think, yet again, you have some of his most iconic songs on here, like the title track. I mean, as soon as you hear that, the opening few notes, you know you're in for just one of the most beautiful songs. But as soon as you're singing, unforgettable, that's what you are. I mean, it's just, there's no better recording in the history of his discography, besides maybe you could argue the Christmas song. But I truly think Unforgettable is like the, creme de
Oh
la
yeah.
creme of
And the
his.
version that his daughter did with him, the duet
Mm,
many years later is also gorgeous as well. But yeah,
right, man.
it's such a great song, man.
And that's the thing. If you're bringing it up all those years later, I mean, that says something, right? And
Yeah.
yet again, so many great songs on here. You could say, like, of course, I have to mention Mona Lisa as well, which is just
Oh yeah.
another absolute iconic Nat King Cole song. Of course, Red Sails in the Sunset is a beautiful album closer to the original track listing, and that's what I'm counting. I think this is what John is counting as well. There's so many amazing moments on here as well, and I think, yet again, it's short, and it's amazing because of that. But I do think it sounds a little bit similar. But yet again, I mean, for a track listing so short and a vocalist as iconic as Nat King Cole, what really much more can you ask? Yet again, very excited to keep listening to Nat King Cole throughout my time here. But yeah, this really is such a great compilation album. And yet again, I think a definitive record for him as an artist.
Yeah, and yeah, a lot of compilation albums have made the list so far, but some great ones. And yeah, I'm. It's sad that, like you said, you had a couple of his on your list that only one made it. But if one had to make it, this would be it. This was
Yes,
actually at number 28 on my list. I think Nat King Cole is one of the greatest vocalists of all time, and you can see it
sure.
just in every song on here. All the songs you mentioned. A Portrait of Jenny is great. I Love You for Sentimental Reasons. Like, just every song has something to offer. And like a lot of the albums we've been talking about, it does tend to get a little samey, but it is short and sweet as well. So yeah, I absolutely I love this album, and I'm so glad that it made it. I think it's at a pretty decent spot.
Yeah, man. Well, I had it at number 24, so obviously I may think a little bit more highly of it. But regardless, just really glad to see Nat King Cole, such an iconic figure from this era, that it would really be quite unfortunate had he not made the list at all. But yeah, guys, really, really great choice here, and that is going to take us now to number 33. Roundabout Midnight by Miles Davis from 1957. The second appearance already of Miles Davis on this list. And this album, of course, was probably the most significant release of his career, at least in regards to what it did for his career, because this was his first release on Columbia Records, which he would, of course, make some of his best and most iconic albums on this label. But this is certainly one of the first, and really one of the absolute best. This is one of my favorite Miles Davis records, for sure. Just from the title track alone, you're in for a great dosage of hard bop for throughout this entire 30, almost 39-minute runtime. Of course, I think All of You is a really, really beautiful rendition. Of course, you got A Lucha, I believe, A Lucha, I think you call it, is a really great interpretation of a Charlie Parker tune. But to me, Bye Bye Blackbird is maybe even one of my favorites on here, or really other great song on here. Yet again, I think it drops off a little by the end, but when you have the classic lineup of the Miles Davis quintet on here, you know you're in for some really, truly incredible playing. And really, this is the album, I think, that set the template for Miles Davis in the hard bop era. As I said, relaxing with the Miles Davis quintet is great as well, but this really was yet again what kind of set the blueprint for that and many albums to come afterwards. Certainly, maybe not his absolute best, but it's certainly one of them, and a great transitional album at that, in a way that I think maybe something like Saxophone Colossus doesn't quite reach. Because yet again, it's Davis. I mean, how can you really knock that? And yeah, I would have this album a little bit higher, but I absolutely love it, and I'm glad to see it make the list.
Yeah, another great one. Can't fault it. I think that this was toward the bottom of my list and got knocked off at one point, but I still think it's great. I mean, it's just that moody opener, man, is so good,
Mm-hmm.
and all throughout. I mean, of course, when you got Coltrane and Paul Chambers on there, you're gonna have some great interplay, and then. The title track also being co-written technically by Thelonious Monk when it was being performed kind of on the fly back in 1955 at the festival. What is it called? Newport Jazz Festival. Yeah, and just so cool that you have all these great minds working together at that time frame. Just incredible. And but Miles, man, he really stood apart, and you could really tell it was him playing whenever he was playing the trumpet, man. Just incredible. And yeah, another great pick.
Absolutely, guys. The more Miles Davis on here, the merrier in my book. So, yet again, really glad to see this album. And that, guys, will take us to number 32.
Stringing Along with Chet Atkins by Chet Atkins. Man, I'm so glad this made the list. And I actually think it should be higher, man, because this is just one of those albums that when I first heard it, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh my God, man, this guy is amazing on guitar, and you can just hear the influence on so many different genres, not just country as some would think, like the Nashville sound, but also in really all forms of rock and blues, and his finger picking style. Like, he just had his own thing going, and of course he was influenced by some other artists that came before him, like Django Reinhardt and Les Paul. But man, like, just some of the stuff he does on this record, songs like "Oh" by Jingo and Memphis Blues and 12th Street Rag. I mean,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
man, it's just like mind-blowingly good. And yeah, it doesn't let up. Like, there's not a weak track on here. Uh Everything from St. Louis Blues. I mean, I could name every track on here, but it's just one of those albums that I've come back to a few times, and yeah, absolutely love it. So glad this made it.
Dude, me too, man. And it's so short, too. So you
Yeah.
could just get in and get out. But yet again, it's really hard to find this album, which is quite unfortunate, because
Yeah.
I remember at the time I first heard it, I guess I just was on the deep recesses of the internet. Well, not that deep. But I was, I've heard of Chet Atkins in the past, and then I just saw a video of him playing guitar on YouTube, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I'm
Yeah.
like, this guy's insane. And so I'm like, I gotta listen to something that he's done. And I came by this album, and I was hooked right from the beginning of Oh by Jingo. This is like some of the most virtuistic guitar playing I'd ever heard.
Yeah.
Like, it's really insane. Yet again, you said many genres, but I think really you hear how much he defined the sound of country music with his guitar, and just the usage of the steel guitar as well.
Yeah.
It really reminds me of SpongeBob in a lot of ways, you could say. It really,
Yeah,
set
yeah, I
by the
could see that.
blueprint of Chet Atkins. But yeah, I mean, so many others artists that followed in his wake, like Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton, and like very very similar arrangements that we're still feeling the ripple effect to this day. Probably less so considering where country music is now. But yeah, yet again, from Oh by Jingo, Memphis Blues, 12th Street Rag, one of my favorites as well, Galloping on the Guitar, Main Street Breakdown, and then of course I love his interpretation of the Third Man theme. To
Mhm.
close this thing, I mean, how can you not love that theme in general? I know some people don't. That's crazy. But yet again, I actually had this at number 36 on my list. So I think that this is pretty properly placed as well. I mean, yet again, not too many complaints from me with some of these placements here, besides what I said earlier. But yeah, it is a bit samey. So it's like, even as mind blowing as a lot of this is, you kind of get used to the same tricks over and over again. But regardless, man, I mean, gotta love Chet Atkins as a guitar, but he might be top 10 guitarist of all time. I really
Yeah,
think that there's an argument for it.
sure. Yeah, I can see that. And actually, I had this at number 14 on my list, so that's how much I
Wow.
loved it. But yeah, man, gotta love this dude.
Absolutely. If you guys have not heard this, it seems like a few of you have. But if you haven't, please seek this out. There's a link on YouTube. Maybe we can drop it in the description or something to be able to make sure you guys hear this truly, truly great and very deserving album on this list. So, yeah, guys, that now is going to take us to number 31.
Come fly with me, let's fly away. We got Frank Sinatra yet again on the list with Come Fly With Me from 1958. Absolutely, man. Another one that was high on my list. And I think one of my favorite Sinatra albums, just for the title track alone, man. It's just not just his voice, which is always just great and iconic, but also the arrangement by Billy May on that is just incredible, and the strings just really take it up. Once I get you up there, I mean, it's just so
Where the
great.
air is
Uh,
rarefied.
yes, man. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, it's so cool too. Even though I don't love every song on here, that it's like one of the first concept albums in the way of just every song being about travel or a different destination. So it's fun in that way. And there are some songs on here that I absolutely love the versions of, like Brazil, which is I think just an all-time great
Mm.
track, and I really love his version of that on here. Of course, April in Paris, another one that you hear quite a bit from this era. But yeah, man, Frank Sinatra, just one of the best. I know you kind of alluded to. I had to throw this in here as well, like just one of the first artists that you got into as a child, and same for me. My babysitter,
Mm.
Gloria, used to have me perform Frank Sinatra tunes for my mom when she would come pick me up.
Oh,
And
that's so
especially
cute.
this album cover with the hat makes me think of that, because I would have like one of those uh, that style of hats on and like doing little dance moves and stuff too. But yeah, man, that's where Johnny Radio began, man. It was all in with good old Frank Sinatra. So yeah, I gotta love it, man. And I think this is at a good spot.
Yeah, yet again, I like this more than songs for swinging lovers. Didn't
Mhm.
make my list. Yet again, it's with Sinatra.
Whoa.
It's a yeah. Well, hey, I mean, it's a concept album. Um, I think the title track is one of his absolute most iconic and best recordings. Certainly one of my favorites for sure, and I think I can say that for a lot of people. Yet again, these songs, it's just him going around the world, going to different places. It's nice and it's fun, and a lot of great arrangements from Billy May, like you said. I certainly love On the Road to Mandalay as well. I remember being quite a bombastic number that really
Mhm.
stood out to me. Or also, I see Around the World's on here, not the Daft Punk song, so I just thought I'd make that joke. But yeah, Brazil's amazing. It's a nice to go traveling is a great way to close this record. Yet again, it's just fun. It doesn't. I don't think it's as consistent as some of his other records, but it's certainly one of the more consistent Sinatra records, especially from this era. It might be my second favorite of the 50s, but even so, like, it wasn't on my list. Maybe I have to check it out. I don't think it should be this high, but it's certainly a very respectable choice. And like you said, for me as well, Sinatra, getting into his songs really was a big turning point in my life. Certainly for me performing, and also my relationship with my grandma as well, because she would have been 90 years old last week. I think maybe a week to the day of the airing of this video, in fact. And she was obviously from that era, grew up with Sinatra, and I would sing to her. When she was in the nursing home later on, she acquired vascular dementia after a stroke, and I know there's this video of me, singing to her in the nursing home this song, and she was just very tuned in and so attentive, and it's and I'm
man.
yeah, it's one of those things where is really this deep connection through music, specifically through Sinatra. And this song, yeah, it definitely means a lot to me in a lot of ways. But it's just such a
Yeah.
fun song to begin with, and yeah. So in that case, I'm glad to see it represented in some way. And of course, Sinatra, 2 out of 10 on this episode, so doing pretty
Yeah.
well on the countdown here. And yeah, really the forefather of the concept album. And yeah, even though this isn't is something like Dark Side of the Moon, still pretty good for its time. And yeah, glad to see more Sinatra on here. So
Yeah.
yeah, guys, that's the episode for today. Hope you enjoyed the picks that made this episode. Of course, if any of yours made it on this episode, let us know down in the comments below. Be sure to smash the like button, subscribe, and of course subscribe to Johnny Radio if you haven't already. What are you doing? The next episode of this countdown, of course, is going to be on his channel, as we're concurrently moving back and forth, as we always do with these countdowns. And hey man, always a pleasure to talk about music with you and everything on here. Have a fun time doing this, and hopefully next time we'll be less tired. Let's do it.
Yes. Can't wait, man. See you on the next one. Peace.
All right. Take it easy, guys.
Well,